bustin' makes me feel good, and so does the Ghostbuster movies. You hear the music, and boom, I'm thinking of Halloween and trick-or-treating. The Ghostbusters are a staple of pop culture and Halloween, and the first film is one of the greatest comedies of all time. But what about the other films? How is this franchise bizarrely spawned off of a comedy from the 80s, and it's had 3 sequels in the last 8 years, and now has a new Ghostbusters film coming out in the middle of March instead of Halloween like it's supposed to? It's one of the most interesting film franchises that has kind of happened by accident, and that is what we're going to look at. We are going to review every Ghostbusters film and then rank them by the end, so get ready to have your mind and whatever else blown.
Coming to save the world. Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters.
What is there not to love about the first Ghostbusters film? When you think of a classic comedy, this is it. It's a film that's really about nothing, yet it's elevated so much by its great production design, its improvisational nature, and one of the best comedy casts of all time. And the reason Ghostbusters works as well as it does isn't the proton packs, or the Ecto-1, or the firehouse, even though those are all great details, but it's the Ghostbusters themselves. The comedic timing and relaxed nature between Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, Harold Ramis, and Ernie Hudson is what makes the film tick. Everyone who made this film didn't really care about it, and it makes it even funnier. This is just about 4 guys who are collecting and destroying ghosts and saving the world on accident, and they couldn't care less. The film wisely is about grounding these losers into a crazy world and focusing on the little moments of these guys just trying to figure out what it means to be an exterminator who has to get rid of ghosts instead of bugs. Most incredible films are those that are intricately planned. They have deep and rich elements placed throughout with the scripts and production designs and color palettes and a direction that all goes together to create a vision and a world that only film can create. And then there's Ghostbusters in the corner just doing whatever it wants, and it's just as good as any other masterpiece of comedy. There's barely a plot, as it's just the Ghostbusters moving from place to place, and every new place they go to, they end up just bumping into another comedic situation. Whether it's Rick Moranis or the Terror Dogs or Dickless Man, this movie's the definition of an improvised run-and-gun comedy that just has everything go for it, and it's the textbook definition of lightning in a bottle. This is not a film that should really work, yet it's one of the greatest comedies ever made though. Even though that is clearly what it didn't set out to do when it was just trying to be a fun, dumb comedy about guys busting ghosts. But that does not change that Ghostbusters 1 is an absolute banger, 9 out of 10. Now, I have no idea why you would make a sequel to a film that ended up working on accident, but Ghostbusters 2, while not being as good as the first one, is actually pretty alright. It's the same creative team from the first film coming back, and it's just another Ghostbusters adventure. Now, this one isn't even as close to as masterful as the first film. There's a lot more side plots that don't lead to as many hilarious payoffs as the first film, but it's still got the cast firing off zingers, the charisma is still there, and I really like how they allow the side characters from the first film to really step up in the sequel. Rick Moranis is the secret sauce to these first 2 films that not a single person talks about. He's the funniest character in these first 2 films, and in Ghostbusters 2 he gets to shine even more. Sigourney Weaver as well is fantastic once again, even though it feels like she has a little less to do, but also, like, I don't really care. It's just another fun Ghostbusters adventure. It's not great, but like, did anyone expect it to be? I think everyone would have been happy to keep getting these 6 or 7 out of 10 Ghostbuster adventures, but this is the last one, and that's fine. But no, Ghostbusters, just like any other franchise, couldn't stay dead. I think that makes it even more hilarious, because why would you want to reboot this franchise? The reason the first 2 films work is all about the comedic dynamic of the original cast. There's not really any world building or lore to really build off of, because these movies are just about a-holes who dink around and stop ghost shenanigans. So there's no reason to make a sequel with the old Ghostbusters years later. At least there wasn't a reason in 2016. So after Ghostbusters 2, in 2016 they decided to do a full reboot. So in 2016 we got a new Ghostbusters movie that made the internet lose its mind for some reason that to this day I still don't fully understand. But yeah, let's talk about the 3rd Ghostbusters film, and bizarrely one of the most divisive films in like recent film history. So let's talk about Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters should not have been talked about as much as it was. I mean, the 2016 version Ghostbusters, not the 1984 Ghostbusters. Why didn't they name this a different name? But this movie is really inoffensive. When I went in to watch this, I thought it was going to be some utter disaster that like spit in the face of the original Ghostbuster films. But in reality, it's just another mediocre Ghostbusters comedy. The biggest thing this film has going for it is what I think the weirdo armchair critics hated the most about it, and that is the gender swapped cast.
Perpetual victim at all times.
Fucking here, man. You're so old. Where's your wife? Go home to your family, dude.
Honestly, I think it's a great idea if you're gonna reboot it, because it at least makes it stand out. And this cast I think is 75% fantastic. Leslie Jones, Kristen Wiig, and Kate McKinnon are great and all have a really strong chemistry together. But then there's also Melissa McCarthy, which might be the unfunniest person on the earth after like Joe Coy or Joe Rogan. She's just a charisma black hole and sucks all the comedy out of the room when everyone else is being pretty funny. Chris Hemsworth is fantastic here along with really everyone else in the cast other than Melissa McCarthy. But the biggest problem with this film is that it doesn't really do enough to differentiate itself from the first film. It's never able to fully find its identity. This movie is one Ghostbuster cast member away from being a solid little comedy. Unfortunately, its cast is never able to fully click together and ends up being something different, but never able to stray far enough away to be something truly unique. I think there are some really funny moments in here, but this is a film that is a few pieces away from materializing into something really special. This is a film you'll probably never fully rewatch again, but there might be a scene on YouTube every once in a while you'll click on that'll make you chuckle. I'd give this Ghostbusters a 4 out of 10, but it's easily not the worst Ghostbusters movie. Ooh boy, this one is rough. Ghostbusters Afterlife in the current landscape of legacy sequels might be one of the worst ones due to how confused it is of what it wants to be. They bring in the son of the original director, Jason Reitman, known for his renowned indie dramas like Juno or Tully, and Sony gives him the keys to do a Ghostbuster legacy sequel and it ends up being as disjointed of a Ghostbuster film as the pre-production makes it sound. At its core, Afterlife is trying to be a loose sequel to the original 2 Ghostbuster films, as it focuses on the passing of real-life actor Harold Ramis and his character Egon. It follows his family as they move into this small town and the shenanigans that ensues. They end up running into Gozer and Zool, and as they end up retreading everything from the first film. This movie is the definition of a franchise running on fumes, and at its core, it's a film with nothing to say, and it's absolutely hollow. It's the same plot as the first film, with the exact same villains, just in a new environment with new characters, and it also throws in the old Ghostbusters as a safe measure, which only leads to a more disjointed and diluted film. This movie doesn't really succeed at all at being a Ghostbusters film, but while I was watching it, I kept thinking about how harmless of a film it was. It's extremely well shot, it's directed pretty well, but it's just so generic and slow moving that I felt I'd seen this film 1,000 times and just ended up rolling my eyes every time the movie would stop to a standstill and point at the screen and go, "Hey look, it's the thing from the first movie," instead of creating its own identity or a theme or a core for its own story or just anything to make itself stand on its own merits. It tries to show such reverence for the first film and tentatively walk in its shadow when everything in the first film was trying to show how little any of the actual details mattered. The first film is a loose, somewhat digressive comedy that is held together by bubblegum, and this film treats that original film like it's Shakespeare, and the weirdest thing to come out of that is how it treats Harold Ramis and his return as a ghost. Afterlife's use of Harold Ramis feels really gross. It's really off-putting seeing his CGI ghost being paraded around because his friend's Nepo baby wanted to make a Ghostbuster movie and knew that fans would only come to the theater if the original Ghostbusters came back with Harold Ramis' CGI ghost there. It feels so corporate, and overall it's a pretty disgusting use of someone that passed away a while ago. It feels wrong, and every time he was there I couldn't stop cringing and hoping that it would eventually end, but he's there for the entire final battle. He doesn't go away. And the last thing I want to be thinking about in a Ghostbusters film is the moral implications of CGI. They could have just kept it subtle like they did for the rest of the entire movie, but no, they couldn't have Egon just shot in profile in the ending. They couldn't help themselves. I gotta show my CGI ghost. I can't contain it. Ugh. Ghostbusters Afterlife ends up being a film for an older generation and not really for anyone under the age of like 45. It's for a generation that likes the first film and then got older and now wants a quiet, nice Ghostbusters film. But for me, this is a generic and toothless film at best and a gross corporate disaster at worst. But I like Paul Rudd and I want to give the film some credit, so I'll give Afterlife the benefit of the doubt and give it a 4 out of 10. And then finally, we have Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. This is the direct sequel to Afterlife and the latest Ghostbuster film, and it's just a very light Ghostbuster adventure. It follows our now humongous cast of 9 Ghostbusters as they take on the new Destiny raid boss that turns the city cold, and they have to stop him now. I think this film is a step in the right direction, being a fun Ghostbusters adventure set in New York City again, but it also just shows how out of gas this franchise is. This movie has nothing at its core, and it's about as simplistic as it gets. Ghostbusters fight bad ice ghosts because he wants a free city. Like, that's literally all the movie is. This has been a franchise that's always had to rely on the comedic talent of its actors, but here it feels like the film is on life support, with Paul Rudd, Carrie Coon, and Dan Aykroyd barely keeping this thing afloat. And don't get me wrong, this is a fine film. It's got fun action scenes, it's never that boring, and it doesn't have anything as egregious as the Harold Ramis ghost, or something as annoying as Melissa McCarthy. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire might be the latest Ghostbusters film, yet it's also the one that might be the most hollow. It's not awful, it's just kind of whatever. I'd give it like a 5 out of 10. And that is the entire Ghostbusters franchise reviewed and looked back on, and it has such a bizarre timeline. But before you go, I'll give you my personal ranking of where I'd rank all the Ghostbuster films. In last place at number 5, it's going to go to Ghostbusters Afterlife. It's a bizarre retreading, only for nostalgia, that ends up feeling more creepy than wholesome by the end of the movie. Number 4 is Ghostbusters 2016. I know, I almost lost you there. This is a fine reboot that sticks too close to the original film and feels scared to really be its own thing. And every time Melissa McCarthy comes on screen, just stop, just get out of here. Why don't you go make another pervert Muppet movie? Can we have someone like Caitlin Olsen be in this? She would have been way better than Melissa McCarthy. Anyways, moving on. Number 3 is Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. It's a pretty decent Ghostbusters sequel that is about as harmless as it gets. It's pretty fun, eat your popcorn, and then make sure to get hit with your mind wipe on the way out. Number 2 is Ghostbusters 2. Not a lot of competition apparently, but this is a pretty fun and decent sequel. It doesn't do anything crazy, but the chemistry with the original Ghostbusters is so good that I'm convinced that this cast in their prime could have never made a bad Ghostbusters sequel. But number 1 has to be Ghostbusters. It's one of the funniest films ever made. It's a classic I watch every Halloween, and no one does it like the Ghostbusters. This is comedy geniuses all meeting in the prime of their careers, and it makes a film that is truly unforgettable and managed to spawn off a franchise built off a film so based on individual performances that it has doomed any sequel to fail. Because when you make sequels out of the sole reason to make money instead of looking for a reason to actually continue the franchise, you end up with a film series that slowly but surely loses what makes it special by every passing film. Each one becoming more hollow until you're left with a corpse of a franchise, eventually reduced to its illest and most commercial form, and you don't end up having a box office hit like you did in the 80s, but you end up with a film haunting a movie theater that has no one in it because this franchise has been dead for a while. The problem was, no one could already realize that this franchise was already a ghost.